Hello, everyone, and welcome to WTF Politics. I'm your host, Fred Lonsdale, and welcome to this month's installment of all things politics, campaigns, and political happenings in the run up to the 2024 election. It's been a minute since I put out a video. Life, work, and social events got the better of me. All the writing, research, filming, editing, and presenting is done by yours truly. So when I don't have time to produce an episode, no episodes get produced. I also need to work around my roommate's schedule because our apartment isn't the biggest place in the world, and I'm sure he doesn't want to hear me rambling about the 2024 election while he's trying to eat dinner. So, if this is your first time watching or it's just been a while, I will have links to my previous videos down below, as well as at the end of this video. A little background on myself and my credentials. In 2016, I was a staffer on Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign, and I ran the field operations for a congressional campaign in New Jersey. In 2020, I did a series of election prediction videos where I was far more accurate than pretty much every pollster, all of whom spent way more money yet had way shittier predictions than I did. And lastly, following politics has become something it's become something of a hobby for me, albeit a rather nihilistic hobby. If you want something that's going to cut through the bullshit of the corporate news media and the political punditry class, you want to listen to someone who's going to shoot it straight with you, or you just stumbled upon this and think, well, misery loves company, then welcome to WTF Politics, Episode 3. The Democrats. Are these guys trying to lose? So, a lot has happened in U.S. politics since I last put out an episode. Throughout the spring of 2024, Donald Trump, predictably, romped to victory in the Republican primaries, steamrolling every competitor he came up against and becoming the presumptive nominee, which was confirmed at the Republican National Convention a couple weeks ago. Longtime Republican Senate leader Mitch McConnell announced he would step down from leadership at the end of the year. At the end of May, Trump was convicted of falsifying business records in an attempt to cover his tracks for hush money payments he made to porn star Stormy Daniels. I will let you use your imagination as to why Donald Trump needed to pay Stormy Daniels not to talk about things. And at the start of the month, the former president was the target of an assassination attempt at one of his rallies in Pennsylvania. He was struck in the cheek or the ear, grazed, and he made a full recovery. But it was an assassination attempt nonetheless. But tonight we're not going to focus on Trump, but rather his opponents, who up until last week was President Joseph R. Biden and is now, well, technically, question mark. But first, I'd like to take a few minutes to recap what can only be described as one of the most monumental collapses in the history of politics. So I'm sure I don't need to tell you or rehash that the first presidential debate between President Biden and Donald Trump went about as badly for Biden as it possibly could have. I mean, the only way I guess it could have been worse was if Biden had had a heart attack on live television. To say that he was geriatric Joe up on that stage would be an insult to elderly people with health problems. And look, Trump is a pathological liar with the trustworthiness of a used car salesman from the 90s. That being said, he was borderline restrained and he emerged as the clear winner in that debate, a winner by a country mile. And in typical Democrat fashion, as soon as the debate ended, the pants pissing ensued. Liberal media figures, both from traditional programming like CNN and MSNBC, and those in alternative online forums, began to openly question whether Joe Biden was fit to run, if he should be replaced at the top of the ticket, and what that process would look like. A small but vocal group of mostly moderate Democrats in the House of Representatives publicly called on Biden to drop out, and day by day their ranks grew. Senate Democrats had been less critical of Biden, at least in public, but they had hardly been enthusiastic about his chances in November. And all the while, Biden spent the post-debate weeks refusing to drop out, while his closest aides and allies insisted that nothing was on fire. So, as the days turned to weeks, the calls for Biden to step aside grew from a mumble into a drumbeat. 3 weeks after his disastrous debate performance, it wasn't just backbenchers in the House calling for Biden to announce that he would not run. You had senators in tough re-election races, the leadership in the House and Senate, and even former President Obama, who were privately, or not so privately in most cases, saying Biden should step down. News that the president had contracted COVID added fuel to the narrative that he was in no condition health-wise to run for another 4-year term as president. And so it was that last Wednesday, Joseph R. Biden addressed the nation and announced that he would not seek the Democratic nomination for president in 2024. So right now I'm going to take a critical look at where the Democrats go from here. At the time of recording, they have a little under a month to figure out a game plan to go into the Democratic National Convention, which is where the party's official nominee will be announced. I'm going to go through all the scenarios, the most likely, the most unlikely, and the impossible. So, option 1. Where Democrats stuck with Biden as the nominee is now completely off the table. There was a pretty compelling argument that the time to announce Biden was not going to run for re-election was July 2023, not July 2024. I mean, it's not as if Biden being as old as most people's grandparents is some new revelation. There is also a saying in politics that you go to war with the army, or in this case, the general that you have, not the one you want. And any Democrat replacing Biden will eventually have to deal with their own negatives. That being said, at least 25 Democrats in the House and Senate publicly stated that Joe Biden should drop out. He basically had the entire leadership of the party, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, make his position untenable by leaking private conversations that they were concerned about his mental fortitude and that he had no path to victory. And it was pretty clear that the issue over Biden's age and mental well-being weren't just going to go away. You can't change your position or your policy on being too old. Right? So, option 2, which seems overwhelmingly likely at this point, is where all of the delegates that were pledged to Biden line up behind Vice President Kamala Harris, and she is basically given the nomination. The political punditry class can point to every hypothetical poll about Trump that they want. That doesn't change the fact that polls show Harris as even or at best a couple points ahead of him. Replacing Biden has basically been a net neutral in terms of polling. Simply put, Harris has been a fairly unremarkable vice president who ran for the Democratic nomination in 2020, became the butt of an SNL skit due to, you guessed it, her debate performance and ended up dropping out 2 months before the first primary election. I also think the unfortunate reality is that Harris will deal with all the subtle and not so subtle attacks on race and sex that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton faced, except this time it won't be one or the other. Trump and the Republicans will make her race and sex an issue. If you don't think they will, then you are naive or you have not been following politics over the last 8 years. A separate issue besides her viability is, the optics of what would amount to essentially handing Kamala Harris the nomination for president, especially when the Democratic Party has made Trump's authoritarianism and the undemocratic nature of the Republican Party a central tenet of their campaign messaging and communication. And look, there is a huge difference between Vice President Harris being named the Democrats' nominee without a primary and the laundry list of autocratic, corrupt, and just illegal shit that Trump has pulled. But it does open that door for the false equivalency that the corporate media trips over itself to engage in. I think that a process where Harris is basically named the nominee by Democratic Party insiders, aka the convention delegates, has the possibility to backfire. It's a move that could remind at least independent voters, those sort of people who are kind of on the fence. I don't know how you could be on the fence at this point, but you're sort of independents who are on the fence. It could remind voters of 2016 when establishment Democrats basically took the approach of telling people to shut up and vote or we'll end up with Donald Trump. Option 3, or the nuclear option as I like to call it, would probably be the worst case scenario for Democrats in terms of party organization and functionality, and the one they are actively trying to avoid by vocally backing Harris. In this scenario, Biden, he releases all the delegates that he won in the primaries, and Democratic Party insiders, the prospective candidates, and any aide they can get to Chicago will spend the next 4 days politicking, deal-making, maneuvering, lying, and backstabbing until only one candidate is left standing. From an entertainment value standpoint, this would be great, but I could see this quickly devolving into chaos similar to the last time the Democratic Party had a truly contested convention, the infamous Democratic Convention of 1968, which ironically was also held in Chicago. I think that the disorganization, the politicking, and or the betrayals, real or imagined, would cause delegates, party activists, and constituent leaders to break into factions and basically have their knives out for each other. You would have the progressive wing of the party and the centrist Democrats going at it. You would have the Democratic leadership trying to hold the middle with a unity candidate. And every group or organization associated with a specific issue, labor, LGBTQ, abortion rights, climate change, the war in Gaza, they would all be pushing their own candidate or holding out for the best possible deal. And that's to say nothing of officials from the Congressional Black Caucus and more broadly the cohort of 45-year-old and up African American delegates who, they really do sort of represent the beating heart of the grassroots day-to-day Democratic Party. As I said before, this is probably a scenario that the party as a whole is trying their damnedest to avoid because, entertainment aside, leadership could easily lose complete control of the situation and straddle the eventual nominee with having to explain the most chaotic convention in 50 years to the entire nation. I will say, just a side note here, I will say that, however unlikely, the event that things blow up at the convention and it becomes a free-for-all, if it does, establishment Democrats will be getting exactly what they deserve, in my opinion. As I said before, it's not as if Joe Biden being old is some October surprise. Like, anyone who's casually followed politics would have told you that Biden's age and mental competency was going to be an issue. You know, his age was an issue when he ran in 2020, as well as multiple points throughout his first term. So you'd have to be the worst political strategist in the world not to think Trump and the Republicans would make it a campaign issue in 2024. You know, and remember that in 2020, it was the establishment Dems backroom wheeling and dealing that got the more moderate candidates like Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar to drop out before Super Tuesday and throw their support to Biden. You know, the same party Democrats who were screaming from every mountaintop they could find in 2020 that Biden was the only candidate who could possibly defeat Donald Trump were the first to start running around like rats on a sinking ship post-debate. You know, so I'd like to take a minute here to give a defense of Biden because, frankly, the way he was treated by Democrats, both those who are elected and those who make up what I like to call the professionalized campaign industry, was borderline elder abuse, you know? He has not only been the most progressive president since Lyndon Baines Johnson, but he actually had meaningful and tangible legislative accomplishments. The Inflation Reduction Act was possibly the most important piece of legislation, like, in my lifetime. We have historically low unemployment. He ended 20 years of U.S. involvement in Afghanistan. It's 2 decades. He championed the Respect for Marriage Act. He got the PACT Act passed. You know, I could go on. Look, you know, you can look at the other Democrats we've had as president. Jimmy Carter was more progressive on paper, I guess, but he couldn't get a fucking thing done. You know, Obama, he talked the talk, you know, hope, change, progress, you know, all that, but he really cared more about his legacy when it came to walking the walk. And Bill Clinton, don't even get me started on him. He was just the light beer version of Ronald Reagan. You know, it's unfortunate that the media was successful in turning the narrative around Biden versus Trump into a class president popularity contest. I will always believe that if Biden and the Democrats could have taken the focus away from the person and made it about policy and political accomplishments, then Biden would have had more than a puncher's chance of defeating Trump. You know, I will give Donald Trump his due, that he is far more popular than his party and what they stand for. But conversely, I think the platform and policies that the Democratic Party stands for, well, at least in theory, are far more popular than the politicians that make up said Democratic Party. So, what do Democrats need to do to defeat Trump? It seems like support is definitely coalescing around Kamala Harris. We still have a month to the convention, and as we've seen, a lot can happen in politics rather quickly too. But it would appear that she is on pretty solid ground in terms of securing the party's nomination. So first, Democrats need better messaging and communications. I think that the overall reaction to the fallout from Biden's debate performance says less about him and more about the total ineptitude of the Democratic Party. Democrats as a whole need to stand up, get ready for a real fight, and above all, stop pissing their pants at every opportunity. You want to know why Trump and the Republicans are so successful? It's because they don't give a fuck, all right? The corporate media will go to rank and file Republicans and ask them about indictments or January 6th or Trump's comments on this and that, and the response is always the same. What's your point, doofus? You think we give 2 shits about any of your fake news? Democrats, on the other hand, they make a sport out of taking a negative story about their own candidate and encouraging the corporate media to run wild with it. If Trump had put in a debate performance like Biden's, Republicans would have crushed any talk about it within 3 hours. Democrats spent 3 weeks letting the story metastasize and feeding into the "who will replace Biden at the top of the ticket" narrative. And look, Republicans have historically run Democrats in circles when it comes to messaging and communications. And I can guarantee you that while I'm sitting here recording this, there is a small army of staffers within the Trump campaign, in the Republican National Committee, and in conservative think tanks and organizations who are going over Kamala Harris's life with a fine-tooth comb. If Harris does end up as the nominee, the honeymoon period won't last forever. Conservatives will find something and hammer her on it. Part of what is so baffling to me, about how Democrats lost complete control of the Biden is old and feeble narrative was really how quickly it happened, and that it seemed to be because of a series of unforced errors. Biden needed Democrats to go to the mat for him, and they really didn't. What's done is done, but if the Democratic Party thinks that the 2024 election is going to be some sort of cakewalk, just because they've replaced Biden, they're in for a very rude or very Trumpian wake-up call. Secondly, Democrats need to stop pandering to the center, be proud of the Biden administration's accomplishments, and lay out a clear, bold plan that continues to address the structural socioeconomic issues facing the country. Out of the 25 or so Democrats who publicly called for Joe Biden to step down, most of them came from the centrist / moderate wing of the party. There were a couple of progressive or progressive adjacent reps who called on Biden to withdraw, but most of the heavy hitters on the left, your Bernie Sanders, your AOCs, your Pramila Jayapals, they had all publicly stated that they were backing Biden. Now, some of the moderates who called on Biden to step down represent, purple or light blue House districts, very competitive House districts. Or some were senators in Republican-leaning states. These people were worried about Biden torpedoing their own reelection chances. I would say that most of these folks have the political spine of a chocolate eclair, but they do have a valid point in their concern about Biden being a drag on the ticket. However, there are others from the centrist moderate faction who are in safely blue seats and see Biden stepping aside as an opportunity to gain leverage in deciding who the new nominee will be and presumably gain more political power and influence within a new administration. As I stated above, Biden has been the most progressive president since the 1960s. I don't think many of these centrist Democrats in Congress were thrilled with having to explain to their donors on why they had to take yes votes on massive infrastructure projects, endorse student loan forgiveness, or why the Justice Department was filing antitrust suits right and left. But as I said before, I firmly believe it is the ideas, the policies, and the platforms, rather than the politicians, that drive voters towards the Democrats. And whoever the nominee ends up being needs to embrace the idea that what attracts people to the Democratic Party is it being more than the sum of its parts. Trump and the Republicans know that their positions, their policies, and their overall platform sucks. So they are going to try and make this election about the candidate instead of the issues. Biden stepped down because there are legitimate concerns about his health and well-being, not because there were legitimate concerns about his positions on the issues. Democrats need to come in with a plan and a vision that says, if elected, we will continue and expand on what have proven to be popular policies and laws enacted during Biden's first term. And you have a political party that for the better part of 2 years has been pointing at their Republican counterparts in the House of Representatives and saying, look at what a clown show they are. Basically, since the 2022 midterms, Democrats have been calling Republican-controlled government dysfunctional, chaotic, ineffective, saying that when Republicans merely have the House, they're completely incapable of governing. And Republicans have played right into their hand. Not only has the 118th Congress strived to accomplish the absolute bare minimum, House Republicans willingly removed their own speaker from power, took weeks to elect a new one, and then tried to do it all again 6 months later. But at the first sign of trouble for Biden's presidential campaign, the entire Democratic Party seemed clueless, disjointed, and panicked by something that anyone who's taken a political science 101 course could have told you would have been a problem. As I said before, it's really a when, not an if, on when they will attack Harris or whoever the nominee ends up being. Shitting your pants in front of the entire country, pandering to corporate donors, and abandoning the popular reforms of the last 4 years is not a great look for a party that has spent the past year and a half telling everyone they were the adults in the room. So lastly, and perhaps most importantly, Democrats need to stop playing defense and start playing offense. 2 words: Project 2025. And look, there are all sorts of terrible and egregious things in this that I could get into, right? From ending the Affordable Care Act to tax cuts for the rich, ending all climate protections and free lunch programs, cutting Social Security, cutting Medicare, banning all abortions. But if you follow politics, you probably already know that this is what the Republican Party stands for. Right? Democrats need to take a page out of the Republican playbook and make the phrase Project 2025 so toxic that having to say it out loud will make any Republican squirm. I mean, they need to rip it apart piece by piece, from the fact that it was written by corporate-funded think tanks to the fact that even Donald Trump, I'll repeat that, even Donald Trump has tried to distance himself from it. As I said before, Project 2025 is basically the platform of the Republican Party. It's just now it has a name, all right? Democrats need to get Project 2025 to the point that when they mention how sketchy it is, how chock full of corrupt deals it is, the response of your average Republican voter should essentially be, well, I mean, yeah, kinda. And look, I'm not saying that Democrats shouldn't attack Trump for being Trump. They absolutely should. They've spent too much time, too much money, and too much energy characterizing Trump as the threat that he is, not to make that a topic of discussion. Plus, it's smart campaign politics. Americans need to be reminded that, hey, on January 6th, 2021, this guy tried to overthrow the United States government. But if they allow themselves to get bogged down in the minutia of candidate comparisons and false equivalencies that the corporate media fixates on, it will not end well for the Democrats, regardless of who the nominee is. They'll be opening themselves up to all the ridiculous and delusional whatabouts and yeah buts from conservatives that doomed Hillary Clinton in 2016. Project 2025 is the political manifesto of a bad cartoon villain. The policies that lurch from objectively stupid to clinically insane. Democrats have all the ammunition they need right there. And so I'll end with this. I voted Democrat all my life. I consider myself a progressive, and I will say that Biden has been one of the most impactful presidents this country has had in 50 years. That said, I think that the debate performance, I think after the debate performance, we crossed the Rubicon on his ability to run for re-election, and that he was right to announce that he would not run again. But regardless of who the nominee is, Democrats need to prepare themselves and get amped up for an absolute dogfight. The liberal media, both traditional outlets and alternative news forums, have been cooing and crowing about how Kamala Harris is such a strong candidate and how Biden stepping aside is such a concern for Trump and his campaign. And in fairness to her, Harris has stepped forward as the candidate that Democrats can unite behind, and she has generated a great deal of excitement, at least amongst the rank and file of the party and liberal media outlets. But as I previously said, it is a matter of when, not if, that Trump and his Republican goons dig something up on Harris or any other candidate for that matter. It's only a matter of time until Harris, she looks like the presumptive nominee at this point, stops getting, layup and softball questions from the media and has to start defending her position or policies on this or that. And, Democrats are getting all excited about Harris's poll numbers and recent fundraising figures. But she isn't polling that much better than Biden in most of the swing states. And if there is one lesson everyone should have learned from 2016 and again in 2020, it's that when it comes to measuring Trump's true support, polls are basically irrelevant. My point is that the Democrats as a political entity seem like they want to make this election a referendum on Trump again, even though they are the ones who have been in the White House for the past 4 years. I think this is a worrying strategy because for Democrats, the 2024 election really should be about the team and their accomplishments rather than the star. By every metric, Democrats should wipe the floor with Trump and the Republicans. But I can't help but have a bad feeling about all of this because if I have learned anything from working in politics, it is that no one, and I mean no one, snatches defeat from the jaws of victory, quite like the Democratic Party of the United States. So, thank you all for tuning in. On your screen should be episodes 1 and 2 if you'd like to give those a watch. Not necessary as I cover different topics in each episode, but they could have some educational nostalgia or comedic value. Please like and subscribe as it helps the Big Brother algorithm. I will say that I have episodes 4 and 5 mostly written, so those should be coming at you in August and September. I also have a somewhat squirrely idea to do a live stream on my channel of the Democratic National Convention, which will be held from August 19th to August 22nd. More on that to come. So again, thank you for watching this episode of WTF Politics. It's been real, and cheers everyone.